The broadcast began with ceremonial drums. Not Earth's drums. No, these were gelatinous, reedy, unnatural things, like wet skin being struck with knives. Each beat echoed across the stars, punctuated by bright green sigils in the sky, courtesy of the Velrothi Broadcasting Council, who took pride in making genocide artistic. A gentle female voice, an alien voice, offered translation in over 9,000 dialects. Citizens of the Empire, we present the cleansing of Colony 73A. The sentence, species-wide correction. The method, atmospheric disintegration. Commence enlightenment. Above a blue Earth-like planet, the chambered maw of the Vazal station opened. Inside, a massive cluster of crystalline orbs began to glow. The camera didn't cut away. It zoomed in. They showed everything. Fathers holding children who would never breathe again. Scientists clutching each other as the gravity reversed. A woman praying in Swahili while the ocean above her boiled into steam. 99 million human lives, carefully counted and eliminated. Their deaths rendered into hollow art, soundtracked by the Velrothi's sacred weeping flutes. And when it ended, there was applause. The Galactic Senate Chamber, a vast, spiraling cylinder of obsidian and bone, hummed with satisfaction. Alien delegates of every shape and caste nodded solemnly, as though they just witnessed a rainstorm cleanse the filth from their lawns. Then came silence, the kind that follows too much triumph. The doors hissed open. He walked in. Ambassador Graham Lockwood, Earth's sole representative to the Empire, stepped into the center of the chamber with the calm of a man late to a brunch meeting. He carried no weapon, wore no armor, just a pressed black suit, scuffed leather shoes, and a small porcelain tea set cradled in both hands. The silence deepened. Several delegates raised appendages, curious. Others whispered translations of his entrance, strange rituals. These humans, only the elder among them, those who remembered first contact, shifted uncomfortably. Lockwood moved with measured grace. He was tall, maybe in his mid-40s, with laugh lines that hadn't quite faded and silver in his beard like the edges of old paper. He reached the central podium, set the tea set down with care, and poured himself a cup. Then he looked up and smiled. A soft, genial expression, the kind a librarian might offer before asking you to please lower your voice. "I'm sorry I'm late," Lockwood said. His voice was smooth, touched with an old Midwestern lilt. "I had to find the right kind of honey." A ripple of confusion stirred the delegates. One creature, a Tharn noble the size of a cow and twice as purple, huffed. "Have you nothing to say about the cleansing?" Lockwood's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I do. But I found that rage is a poor appetizer, and I always start with tea." He lifted the cup, sipped, and nodded as though testing the strength of an argument. "I watched the broadcast," he said. "Every second. My aides offered to shield me from it, but I declined. I thought it only right that I see your art." The Velrothi senator, whose eyes blinked sideways and whose skin glowed faintly with self-importance, straightened proudly. "It was designed to be instructive." "Oh, it was," Lockwood replied warmly. "You taught us something valuable." He set the cup down. "I imagine you expected grief," he continued. "Or perhaps fury. Maybe even begging. But Earth is older than you think. We've buried civilizations before. Ours and others." A hush settled. The kind that feels like air holding its breath. Lockwood walked slowly along the outer ring of the podium, turning to address each section of the chamber as if giving a eulogy in a place of worship. "I remember when we thought contact with alien life would unite us. You remember that old fantasy? World peace through cosmic perspective." He chuckled, low and dry. "Turns out we didn't need peace. We needed memory." The Xalic warden, cloaked in black feathers, leaned forward. "We have removed your colony. We expect a formal retreat from this quadrant." Lockwood's eyes twinkled. "You expect many things. You expected we'd stay on Earth. You expected we'd share technology freely. You expected us to adopt your tongue, your customs, your theology. And we did for a time." He leaned in, his tone still conversational. "You see, you thought we were harmless because we laugh, because we write poetry, because we cry over dogs. A low snort came from somewhere among the seats. Lockwood turned toward the sound with amusement. "Let me clarify something for the council," he said, enunciating carefully. "We don't cry because we're weak. We cry because we remember what it's like to feel safe. And when we lose that, well, we become very, very efficient." The room pulsed with unease. It was no longer the silence of satisfaction. It was the quiet that follows a footstep behind you in an alley at night. "I'm not here to beg," Lockwood said. "I'm here to give you a gift." He pressed a button on his coat cuff. Above him, a hologram blinked into existence. A single white card rotated slowly, suspended in light. Printed on it was a red stamp. "Operation. Glance twice. Phase 0 completed." Several delegates stood. One began to shout. Lockwood kept speaking. "I want you to understand something. We don't do wars the way you do. You invade with fleets and fire. You like the theater of it. Drama. Impact." His voice darkened like a cello note deepening. "We don't. We make ecosystems collapse from inside. We replace your myths with instructions. We teach your children new words for surrender." He stepped back toward his tea. "This wasn't our war," he said. "Not until yesterday." The Velrothi senator stood abruptly. "Is that a threat, human?" Lockwood's smile vanished. "No," he said quietly. "That was a diagnosis." Gasps, rustling limbs, electric flashes of panic across various species. One alien tried to flee the chamber. Another began screaming at their translator to find Earth's military movements. One delegate, a gelatinous being known as Sish, collapsed in a pool of bile, whispering. The humans were always waiting, always watching. Lockwood watched the chaos unfold with a peculiar calm. He poured himself another cup. "I wonder," he mused aloud, "if any of you ever studied our myths. You really should have. We're fond of monsters. Not because they're real, but because they're warnings." He drank deeply, then looked into the eyes of the Velrothi senator. "You showed us yours," he said. "Now we'll show you ours." Then he turned and walked toward the exit, footsteps slow, echoing, steady. The chamber erupted in alarms, flashing lights, translated panic in 1,000 languages. Somewhere overhead, a siren screamed in tones so low it rattled bones. Lockwood paused at the threshold and looked back one last time. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said gently. "Bring your gods, if you have any left." And he was gone. The Galactic Senate was still screaming when the lights went out. The door to the subterranean command center hissed open without a sound. The light inside was dim, gold-toned, like dusk had been piped in from another world and taught to stay still. Earth had moved underground long ago, not out of fear, but calculation. Above ground was for sunlight and illusion. Below was for memory and revenge. Ambassador Lockwood walked through the corridor as though the walls recognized him. They might have. Everything down here was built to respond to humans, by humans, for humans. Waiting at the central table was a woman with iron posture and crow-black hair. Her uniform bore no stars, no ribbons, just a matte insignia of a hand closing around a planet. Colonel Rhea Brooks, call sign Mother, head of strategic reclamation. She didn't stand. She nodded once. "They're panicking," she said. Lockwood loosened his tie, took a seat. As expected, across the table sat Lieutenant Elias Grant, blond, freckled, and leaning backward in his chair with a spoon in his mouth and a bowl of cereal resting on a classified document. He looked like the kind of man who might get lost in a Walmart and enjoy it. "They thought you were joking," Elias said, mouth full. "I often do sound like I am." Brooks slid a tablet across the table. "You lit the fuse. What happens next is us." Lockwood scanned the contents. The text was sparse. Targets, rotations, species vulnerabilities. The layout was elegant, like a symphony sheet. It had to be. Operation Alien Extinction was never going to be a war. It was a choreography of removal. Status of Project Silence. Lockwood asked. "Phase 1 initiated yesterday," Brooks replied. "Cis-sorry sky fibers reversed polarity. Clouds collapsed. They're breathing concrete." Lockwood looked to Elias. "Sniper Team Beta?" I already sent them, Elias said, licking a spoon. They'll finish their eggs, then finish the job. Which job? Whichever one I underlined in blood. Lockwood chuckled. I love your subtlety. I'm from Iowa, Elias said. Subtlety is passive-aggressive weather reports. Lockwood leaned forward. How long until the Velrothi realize they've lost control of the translation grid? Brooks tapped the screen. 3 hours. Once their dialect matrix destabilizes, they won't be able to give orders across sectors. Their officers will start defaulting to primal commands, which is whoever screams loudest. Lockwood exhaled through his nose, slow and precise. And our own civilians? Brooks looked up for the first time. They're angry. Quietly. Which is worse? There was a pause. An old, graveyard kind of pause. The kind shared between people who have walked through blood without getting their shoes dirty, because they knew it was coming. Elias pushed his cereal bowl aside and pulled out a small silver case. From it, he removed a ring, black metal, inscribed with a red crescent. He slipped it onto his finger like a man slipping into old armor. Guess it's time we stopped pretending we were ever just human, he said softly. Lockwood looked at him. You still get nervous? Only when I'm the nice one. The screens surrounding them came alive. 12 windows, 12 sectors of the galaxy. In each, a human agent moved. A woman shaking hands with a royal slug on Glorate. A sanitation worker swapping filters on a temple ventilation system on Jixer Prime. A child handing out candy on a diplomatic dock. Each one carried no weapon. And each one was the end of a civilization. Brooks stood and activated the master map. It was beautiful in a way. Stars and planets aligned like constellations in an old myth. But where the Empire saw control, humanity saw pressure points. Fragility hidden behind grandeur. She pointed at the planets. Every major Empire world has been seeded with ecosystem disruptors, psychological shifters, mimetic decay loops. Once the first one collapses, the rest will follow. And how long until they realize the rot is internal? Lockwood asked. They won't, she said. Because the first thing we erased was their ability to doubt themselves. That's cruel, Elias muttered. Brooks turned. It's human. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of a distant siren rose from somewhere deep in the earth. Not a warning, but a signal. Lockwood stood, straightened his cuffs. What do we call this moment? Brooks responded with steel in her voice. The beginning of their forgetting. The elevator that took them upward was shaped like a vertical blade. Sleek, narrow, humming with stored rage. As they rose, the lighting changed from gold to pale blue. Cold. Purposeful. At the top, beneath the Wyoming sky, stood the launch field. Dozens of clean, unmarked shuttles prepared for departure. Each ship had a target. Each human aboard knew their task. There were no speeches. No banners. Earth didn't need ceremony anymore. It needed results. Lockwood stepped onto a platform and addressed the small crowd of black-clad operatives. You're not soldiers, he said quietly. You're reminders. He scanned their faces. Men, women, some old, some who looked like they might still be in school. None afraid. When they erased our colony, he continued, they thought they were making history. What they made was certainty. A soft wind rustled the grass at their feet. One of the ships hissed to life, ready for flight. They thought we'd beg, Lockwood said. He turned to Brooks and Elias. Time to prove we don't. Elias snapped a salute with 2 fingers and climbed into a ship, humming something suspiciously like a country tune. Brooks disappeared into her own transport, pulling her hood over her sharp braid like a priestess ready for the altar. Lockwood stayed behind. He watched as the fleet of quiet ships rose from the plains like blackbirds scattering from old cornfields. No thunder. No explosions. Just lift. Precision. Finality. He knew what would happen next. On Tixara Prime, the rain would turn to mercury. On Yulden 5, the statues would begin weeping hydrogen. On Velrothi Prime, every light would flicker with Morse code, and the message would read, "You started this. We finished preparing." Humanity had always prepared. It was a reflex born from millennia of loss. From ice ages and empires, betrayal and plague. The aliens couldn't know, that humanity, in its softness, had evolved something brutal, the ability to weaponize being underestimated. Back in the command center, Lockwood stood alone. He reached into his coat and removed a thin envelope. He placed it gently into a slot marked Legacy Transfer, Level Omega. Inside it, a letter to his daughter. It read only this: "They killed our people on every screen in the galaxy, so we stopped explaining ourselves." A low chime sounded. A new message from Deep Space Outposts. One of the alien suns had just gone dark. Not exploded. Not consumed. Dark. As if someone had flipped a switch on a god. Lockwood didn't blink. He looked into the camera, pressed record, and spoke in a voice as soft as snowfall. "To the Galactic Empire," he said, "you had your moment." A pause. A breath. "This is ours." He ended the transmission. And across 1,000 alien worlds, lights began to go out, not because the power failed, but because Earth had stopped pretending to be merciful. The Empire had a word for humans. Niskar. It meant the polished ones. The ones who smiled too much, who used napkins, who mourned the dead, who danced, who drank things like coffee and wine and called it culture. They called us civilized. And that, more than anything, was their first mistake. On the 72nd hour after the broadcasted genocide, something small and strange occurred on Velrothi Prime. The birds stopped. Not dropped dead. Not migrated. They simply stopped. Suspended mid-flight in their atmosphere, hung like ornaments, as if the sky had grown tired of movement. One ornithologist recorded the silence before she choked on glass that hadn't been in her lungs before. It was considered an anomaly. 1,000 miles away, a fountain in the temple of high ethos began bubbling in reverse. The water curled back into its base like it was remembering its source. It sang a single note, high and mournful, that made 3 monks bleed from the eyes. That, too, was marked inconclusive. But when the oceans blinked, visibly twice, as if something beneath them had just opened a lid, the Velrothi sent word to the council. They were concerned. On Glor 8, the towers melted. They didn't burn. They folded, like wax receiving whispers, collapsing inward, until they became small cubes humming with electrical grief. A scream rippled across the planetary net. One last, brief, unified question. Is this them? The Senate of Worlds convened in emergency. Delegates snapped orders into translators that no longer worked. Holograms of maps shimmered like uncertain memories. Systems were going dark without warning. Infrastructure melted. Leadership vanished. Some ships launched escape protocols, only to be rerouted into gravitational pockets that hadn't existed an hour ago. It was as if the very physics of the galaxy had been asked to reconsider its loyalties. Back on Earth, in a quiet white room, Graham Lockwood stirred his tea. He was seated at a long table with a single wall screen displaying 12 feeds, each a different world, each unraveling in its own way. The camera hovered just above his shoulder, catching only the edge of his calm expression. Across from him sat Dr. Nayana Patel, age 62, eyes like surgical steel. "It's begun," she said. Lockwood nodded. "Velrothi language core has collapsed," she continued. "Their leaders can't form coherent speech. Neurolinguistic attack worked. And Glor. Psychotectonic decay phase has entered spontaneous recursion. They're screaming hymns they never wrote." Lockwood took another sip, thoughtful. "They'll blame gods. Or ghosts." Patel tilted her head. "What do we call it?" Lockwood looked at her. An update. Outside, above the Rockies, Earth remained blue and boring. Farmers still harvested wheat. Children played in VR parks. No parades. No proclamations. Just quiet knowledge. And a shared silence that had weight now. Atop Jixer 7, alien soldiers stormed a refugee station, convinced the humans were hiding in the walls. They found nothing. And then the walls blinked. And then the station collapsed into a single unbroken marble. The only human ever stationed there? A janitor. 46. Amateur jazz pianist. Deployed a month ago with a mop and a smile. Gone now. The Empire's analysts tried to model Earth's methods. They couldn't. They fed data into prediction cores, but the results came back in riddles. Humans grieve like architects. Their losses are blueprints. They cry in hex code. Meanwhile, the humans weren't speaking anymore. At least, not to the aliens. Inside a clean chamber 10 kilometers beneath Geneva, Lieutenant Elias Grant sat in front of a piano. Not because he played well, he didn't, but because the notes helped him think. Each key struck was a message. Each pause, a death sentence. A map hovered above him, 3D, rotating slowly. Each read, that was a lost world. Each goal won was next. He tapped a single key. In response, somewhere in the quadrant of Trunkai, a library burst into flames that produced no heat, only whispers. Brooks stepped into the room behind him, removing her gloves. "We've confirmed it," she said. "Empire's inner council just tried to fire a mass disintegration cannon. It turned inward." Cannon suicided? Every circuit looped back. The weapon became a mirror. Elias chuckled. "Poetry. Brooks, Saturday, they don't understand how we got this far. They think we climbed here with clean hands. They don't realize we were sharpening blades in our prayers." She looked at the piano. "You can stop playing now." Elias struck one last chord. "What's next?" Brooks smiled slightly. Phase 3. Across the galaxy, alien leaders huddled together like dying stars. They begged the math to make sense. Their sciences told them humans should not have this reach, this quiet omnipresence. They sent envoys. They broadcast apologies. They promised reparations. The messages were received. None were answered. Instead, a single image began appearing on alien holoscreens, in dreams, in reflective glass. A tea set, perfectly white, undisturbed, empty. And underneath, one word: remember. In the Great Senate, Councilors ITVA stood trembling. "They called them civilized," he whispered. "But that was their camouflage." His aides didn't respond. They had stopped breathing. He fell to his knees. "It was never a war," he said. "It was a reset." Then the lights blinked once, twice, and never again. On Earth, in a garden behind the Geneva chamber, Lockwood walked among the lemon trees. He carried a book of poetry under one arm. The smell of citrus drifted softly around him. Above, the sky was perfect. Below, the stars screamed. A young technician approached him, face pale, fingers shaking. "Sir," she stammered. "The Empire, they've fallen silent. Entire sectors. No word. No pulse." Lockwood didn't stop walking. "They'll come back." For a moment. The technician blinked. "What if they retaliate?" "They won't." "Why not?" He turned to her. "Because we already are their retaliation." Behind him, the lemon tree bloomed. And above that, in the orbit of a once mighty world, a single human satellite played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on loop as the clouds curled into spirals and the planet began to forget its own name. In one final act of galactic arrogance, the Velrothi tried to activate their failsafe, a system-wide blackout meant to plunge all worlds into secure hibernation. It triggered. Nothing happened, except a single message, traced into the blackout silence. "We thank you for your patience. Operation Alien Extinction proceeds on schedule." The Empire didn't collapse. It unraveled, thread by thread, word by word, belief by belief, until all that was left was a mirror reflecting a terrified, confused face asking, "How did they do this?" And from that mirror, humanity whispered, "We told you. We were listening." Back on Earth, Lockwood stepped into the main command room and pressed his palm to a panel. A soft green light pulsed once, then revealed a hidden folder. Inside it, the original blueprint. Operation glanced twice. At the bottom, one note scrawled in human ink, not digital font. "They called us civilized. And we let them." He closed the file, the silence surrounding him like a cathedral's hush before a sermon begins. Then a soft ping lit the room. Brooks appeared on screen. "Sir, the last phase is ready." Lockwood looked out the window as the first unnatural star began to dim. Begin. The fleet came in silence. 2,000 ships. Every shape, every size. Clad in gleaming obsidian and gold. The Galactic Empire's full strength, gathered not in unity, but desperation. They filled the void like ink poured across glass, orbiting the remains of Velrothi Prime, where cities had folded in on themselves and memories dissolved from the minds of survivors. No broadcasts were sent ahead. No terms. No warnings. They thought Earth wouldn't see it coming. And Earth didn't. Because Earth was already gone. Not destroyed, no. Worse. Hidden. Masked behind encryption layers, so advanced even gravity forgot it existed. The stars around it refracted light in all directions, sending probes into endless loops. Entire scouting vessels vanished with no trace, as though Earth had whispered to the universe itself and told it to close its eyes. Inside the command core buried beneath the Rocky Mountains, Ambassador Graham Lockwood watched the incoming fleet on a screen the size of a cathedral wall. His hands were clasped behind his back. His suit was immaculate. His tea sat untouched. "They're finally here," he said. Beside him, Colonel Rhea Brooks nodded once, pulling up a rotating 3D model of the Empire's ship formation. Her eyes scanned it like a surgeon about to cut. "No communications," she said. "No diplomacy. Just death. Which is why," Lockwood said calmly, "they're going to lose." Lieutenant Elias Grant stood at the side of the room, leaning with his shoulder against the wall, chewing a piece of peppermint gum like he'd been born in a barn and told the galaxy was a lie. He spat the gum into a napkin. "How long?" 17 minutes until full firing range, Brooks said. Elias cracked his knuckles. "And they still think we'll fight fair." Lockwood turned from the screen. "Are we ready?" Brooks handed him a black box, sleek, sealed, no visible buttons. Just a thin crimson line across the center. "We've been ready since Hiroshima," she said. Lockwood stared at the box. His reflection stared back. Older, sterner, tired in a way that didn't reach the eyes, only the soul. "When this ends," he said, "there won't be a Senate left." Brooks didn't flinch. There shouldn't be. He pressed his thumb to the box. A single chime rang through the command center. Not an alarm. A confirmation. In space, light vanished. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Vanished. The stars around the Empire's fleet were simply no longer there. Several alien ships tried recalibrating sensors. Others attempted to retreat. But retreat required coordinates, and coordinates required reference points, and all reference points had been rewritten. Brooks leaned over the console. "They just entered Phase 7. Elias grinned. "That's the good one." On the lead ship of the Imperial Armada, Grand Admiral Vorik, 7-foot-tall reptilian tactician of 1,000 battles, watched his monitors die one by one. No visual. No auditory feedback. Just a growing scream in the internal comms from captains unable to locate their own engines. "Deploy the gods," Vorik snapped. His adjutant blinked in confusion. "Sir, our biomechanical avatars. Release them. I want the human homeworld torn apart in prayer and plasma." The command was sent. And then, beneath them, space cracked open. It did not explode. It folded. A perfect crease through reality, as though the void itself had been sliced with a knife honed on ancient regret. From the tear came no sound. Only 12 human vessels. Small, matte black, quiet, unlabeled, unarmed, unafraid. The first one moved. It glided between the Armada's ships like a shadow hunting fire. It passed under the belly of a battlecruiser, and the cruiser evaporated. Not exploded. Evaporated. A shimmer of static, a faint whiff of lemon, and then nothing. The Empire froze. The second ship moved next, carving a path not with weapons, but with absence. Every vessel it passed dimmed. Crew screamed about time freezing, about seeing their own deaths unfold backward. One pilot wept as his skin turned to ash before he could understand why. Vorik stood trembling. "They aren't attacking," he said. "No, sir. They're harvesting." On Earth, Lockwood watched from the command room. The ships weren't firing. They weren't transmitting. They were performing. Every line of their trajectory was calculated years ago. every maneuver written into a language not meant to be spoken, only felt. Brooks activated the final sequence. "We're not targeting ships anymore," she said. "We're targeting belief." The fleet began to disintegrate. Not all at once. In pockets. In patterns. One vessel would implode in a perfect sphere, while another would burst into cascading flowers of blue light. One captain sobbed as he watched his own DNA scroll across the hull in human cursive. And then, the silence. Complete. Across the Empire's networks, one message appeared simultaneously. It was not broadcast. It simply was. A handwritten note, floating midair on every screen. "Civilization is a mask. You forced us to take ours off." In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Senate, a final emergency meeting was held. Only 32 members remained. They argued in trembled tones. Some still denied the possibility. Others demanded divine intervention. One broke down crying when he realized he couldn't remember his homeworld's name. A hologram flickered on. Graham Lockwood stood there, alone, holding a glass of wine. "I don't bring ultimatums," he said. "You don't deserve them." One senator tried to shut off the transmission. His hands passed through the controls. Lockwood smiled. "We came in peace. Remember? Silence. We learned your languages, wrote your history books, adopted your philosophies, shared everything." He sipped the wine. "And you watched us build colonies, only to burn them. Watched us bleed, only to televise it." He set the glass down. "And now you've met the part of us that remembers. The part that buries pain like seeds." Another senator shouted, "What do you want?" Lockwood tilted his head. "Extinction," he said gently. "And understanding. In that order." The hologram flickered out. The remaining senators stared at each other. No more screaming. No more commands. Just a single, unified realization. They had broken something that was never going to ask for help again. Back in orbit, Elias sat inside one of the 12 black vessels, legs kicked up, watching as an alien moon fractured into frozen petals. He flicked a switch on the side panel and spoke into the microphone. "Phase complete," he said. "How many planets left?" Brooks replied from Earth. 12 major nodes. All corrupted. They'll collapse on their own. "Want me to stay?" "You're done." Elias sighed. "Kinda wanted to see if they'd beg." "They won't," Lockwood said, stepping into the comm line. "They've seen what lives underneath our diplomacy." Elias grinned. "Bet they miss our tea now." And then, without fireworks or final speeches, the last beacon of the Galactic Empire. Its prime archive. Folded in half. Not shattered. Folded. Like a letter never sent. Back on Earth, Lockwood returned to his garden. The lemon trees were blooming again. The wind carried music, not composed, just natural. Birds. Breezes. Breathing. Brooks met him beneath the arbor. "It's done," she said. He nodded. "And the others?" "Returning home." Lockwood touched a leaf. "Do you think they'll write about this?" "No one left to write it." He smiled faintly. "Good." Above them, the night sky was unusually clear. The stars were exactly where they had always been, except a few. Some were missing. Brooks noticed. "That one," she said, pointing. "Wasn't that part of the Trisari belt?" Lockwood looked up. "Not anymore." A silence settled between them. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Do we stop here?" He thought for a long time. Then answered. "No." She didn't argue. Instead, she pulled a tablet from her coat, placed it on the stone bench, and tapped a single icon. It opened to a file labeled Operation Horizon Fade. Beneath it, 12 more names. 12 more coordinates. Lockwood sat down beside her. "They'll call us monsters." She folded her arms. "They already did. Back when we were just civilized." He smiled, then looked up and watched the galaxy go quiet.